The prosecution did not allege that Chauvin killed Floyd because he was black. The prosecution did not allege racism, but that is what Chauvin stands convicted of. That's what America stands convicted of, not just in the court of law, but in the court of public opinion, which matters a hell of a lot more than the court of law. But there is one thing that the jury didn't do. There's one charge that the jury never even considered. There was one charge that was never even alleged, that Chauvin was convicted of. And that, of course, is the biggest charge of all. Not the murder charge. The charge that Derek Chauvin is emblematic of an American system of racism. That charge was never proved. No evidence was brought to that idea. There was not even an allegation that this killing was racial in any way. That allegation never was brought to court. There was no evidence presented of that allegation. And yet that was the entire story. If you ask Americans today, is Derek Chauvin a racist? I guarantee you, a majority of Americans will say yes. And what is the evidence of that? That George Floyd died. That is not evidence of racism. That's evidence, at best, of a bad cop. It is evidence of bad police procedure. It is evidence of recklessness. That is not evidence of racism. But we all know that the real charge that was brought against Derek Chauvin, because it was being brought against America more broadly, is that America is racist, and this case is emblematic of that. This data point is all about America being racist. He was never charged with that. He was never accused of that. No evidence was brought of that. But not only was he convicted of that, the entire country was convicted of a crime that there was literally no evidence presented of. And that really is the part that is terrible for the country and has driven the narrative all along. Because let us be real about this. If the body cam footage had broken at the time when it was supposed to, by the way, the body cam footage broke well after the original third-party footage of what was going on with Chauvin and Floyd. If the body cam footage had broken and the third-party footage had broken and all of the evidence had been cast into the public sphere, if all of that had happened and there had not been 20 million people in the streets declaring that America was systemically racist and that this case was a case of racism, it is highly doubtful to me whether a jury would have convicted of second and third degree murder on this evidence. Which suggests to me, of course, that when it comes to due process, this was due process in name. It was not justice in effect, because individual justice relies on you evaluating the evidence before you, not on bringing in preconceived notions about systemic American racism that were never alleged in the courtroom. The prosecution did not allege that. The prosecution did not allege that Chauvin was a racist who went to kill a black man that day. That was not alleged. The prosecution did not allege that Chauvin killed Floyd because he was black, or even that he was reckless because he was black. The prosecution did not allege racism, but that is what Chauvin stands convicted of for the rest of his life. That's what America stands convicted of in the view of the entire media, in the view of the entire Democratic Party. This was eminently political from beginning to end, from beginning to end. So when I say that the jury is wrong, juries get it wrong. But the question isn't whether the jury got it wrong. And the question is whether the jury got it wrong because they were actually convicting Chauvin of a crime that he was not even alleged to have committed, which is standing in for America's evil racist system. And the answer there is pretty obviously yes. Okay? And you can see it in every element of the narrative that's been trotted out, every single element of the narrative. For example, Philonise Floyd, who is a relative, George Floyd's brother, got up and suggested, standing next to Al Sharpton, one of the great race baiters in American history, and Jesse Jackson, another one of the greatest race baiters in American history, and Benjamin Crump, another great race baiter in modern American history. Philonise Floyd stood there and suggested that George Floyd was like Emmett Till. And now, for those who don't know about the Emmett Till crime, one of the great racial crimes in American history, Emmett Till was a 14-year-old black boy who was falsely accused of having sexually harassed a white woman. The white woman's family then went to the place where Emmett Till lived, dragged him out of his house, shot him, and threw him in a river. In other words, the circumstances surrounding George Floyd's death are nothing like the circumstances surrounding Emmett Till's death, which was a purely racist murder in the South in the Jim Crow era. But this is the comparison that was made continuously and repeatedly, is that every day America's racist system is creating new Emmett Tills. And George Floyd is just the latest example of this. Here is Philonise Floyd making that case.
The person that comes to my mind is 1955. And to me, he was the first George Floyd. That was Emmett Till.
Yeah. Wow. Wow.
I did was on CNN with Deborah Watts, and she just brought him back to life.
Wow.
People forgot about him.
Yeah.
But He was the first George Floyd.
Okay, that is a lie. By the way, it is a slander against Emmett Till, who is not, in fact, a repeat criminal, who had held up a pregnant woman at gunpoint and robbed her house with her kid in the house. He was not a repeat drug offender who done jail time. He was not a person passing counterfeit bills, Emmett Till. He was not somebody who resisted arrest. He was not any of those things. Emmett Till was killed because he was a black boy living in the Jim Crow segregated South, and there were white racists who murdered him. There's no similarity between the Emmett Till case and the George Floyd case. But again, that is what Chauvin was convicted of yesterday. Not just in the court of law, but in the court of public opinion, which in America matters a hell of a lot more than the court of law. And it's not just Chauvin who stands convicted of that, of course. The idea from the entire Democratic Party and the media is that it's the entire country that stands convicted of that when it was not even alleged based on evidence. It was not even alleged. And it seems to me that what happened really here is that the jury took allegations that were not even made and then read them into the crime. Derek Chauvin had to be convicted of second and third degree murder, not because the fact pattern supported second and third degree murder, might have supported manslaughter, but he had to be convicted of second and third degree murder, or whatever charges they threw at him, frankly, because he was a stand-in for the evil history of American racism and the current system of American racial prejudice. I hope you enjoyed that clip from The Ben Shapiro Show. If you did, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you stay up to date with all our future content.